Homeschooling dads have a unique opportunity to lead their families and influence their children in ways that are personal, powerful, and pleasing to God. Today, I have the honor of talking with one of my favorite authors, Joseph Pearce, about the role of the father in homeschooling.
Welcome to Homeschooling Saints, the podcast that helps you create the homeschool you love for the people you love. Our host is Lisa Mladinich, a Catholic life coach, TV host, best-selling author, and an instructor at Homeschool Connections.
Before we get started, remember to subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you're watching on YouTube, click the bell to join our channel. Hi, I'm Lisa Mladinich, your host, and today we're talking about the role of the father in homeschooling with someone I have admired for many years. Joseph Pearce is senior contributor at the Imaginative Conservative. A native of England, Mr. Pearce is director of book publishing at the Augustine Institute, editor of the St. Augustine Review, editor of Faith and Culture, and series editor of the Ignatius Critical Editions. Check those out. His biographies are amazing. He is the author of numerous books which include The Quest for Shakespeare, Tolkien, Man and Myth, The Unmasking of Oscar Wilde, C.S. Lewis and the Catholic Church, Literary Converts, Wisdom and Innocence, A Life of G.K. Chesterton, Solzhenitsyn, A Soul in Exile, Old Thunder, A Life of Hilaire Belloc, and further up and further in, Understanding Narnia. I'd like to also mention one of my favorite books, Race with the Devil, Mr. Pearce's thrilling conversion memoir. Mr. Pearce is also an instructor at Homeschool Connections and teaches many popular courses your children will love. In fact, you will too, on the writings of Shakespeare, Tolkien, Shelley, Wilde, Homer, and other great writers that will just so bless your family. Joseph, welcome to the program and thanks for taking the time.
Oh, it's wonderful to be with you, and you're quite correct, of course, that last but not least is the fact that I'm a long-time instructor for the Homeschool Connections. It's such a blessing to have actually met the people that run it, Maureen and Walter, and to have been part of the team, so to speak, for I've lost count of the years, but a number of years now.
Yeah. And, you know, I've talked to parents who have said to me, our dream was when our kids got a little older that they could study with people with a passion for the subjects, like the real deal scholars. Wouldn't that be amazing? And when they stumbled across Homeschool Connections and found people like you, it blew their minds that they could have their children get online and have these live courses. So it really is just a huge blessing. It's a joy to be with Walter and Maureen, of course. They're amazing people, but also to be a blessing to others. We're talking today about a subject that I think is not talked about enough because our cultural narrative right now is that fathers are disposable and that men in media tend to be the butt of all the jokes, whereas women and their children are always wiser and smarter, faster on their feet. But the real statistics from real scholarship show just the critical importance of fathers in their children's lives. Could you step us into some of your thoughts about what is the role of the father? You can start with in the family generally and then step it into what your homeschooling life is like, Joseph.
Well, I might start being somewhat personal. You mentioned my conversion story, Race with the Devil, and that charts my conversion to Catholicism by the grace of God. But prior to that, I lived a very dissolute lifestyle, and I made all the mistakes that the hedonistic culture tell us that is good for us. And I know from experience that it isn't. But more to the point, it's not good for our children. So I've had, 2 children from an old marriage, and I wasn't there for them. Their mother was abused physically, and she was abusive as a consequence of that abuse. She didn't know how to love because she was never shown love, and because that relationship didn't work, I wasn't around. I mean, I saw my children most weekends, but I wasn't around to be a father. And one of my kids back in England has turned out amazingly well, and the other one's a mess. But I do know, and then by comparison, I am now, by the grace of God again, met a wonderful Catholic girl hardly a girl anymore, a woman. She was a cradle Catholic and knew what the faith was about. And we've been working at our family and at our marriage now for 18 years. And we have a 17-year-old son. And an 11-year-old daughter who's just beginning Homeschool Connections this semester, this coming semester, which we're very excited about. We've had some miscarriages and a stillborn daughter as well, but it's not been an easy or straightforward ride. But we feel very blessed. But what I'm doing now is seeing the difference between having both parents loving each other, living with each other, and raising the children with love and a spirit of self-sacrifice as Christians are called to do. And I can see in the lives of our children exactly what a difference that makes. So we can quote as many sociological studies to show the importance of fatherhood, but in my own case I don't need such studies, because my own life is a testimony to how to do it wrong and how hopefully to at least work at getting it right.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I love the statistics because I feel like we live in that kind of a culture where everybody's got information at their fingertips, and sometimes just to startle somebody out of the cultural mindset about fathers, it helps to know that in families where only one of the parents is practicing their faith, if it's the father, 78% of children will grow up to practice their faith. If it's only the mother, about 28%. That tells
I know those statistics, and I think they're very interesting and extremely very useful. And I wasn't saying that we don't need statistics. On the contrary, the statistics show us, if you like, empirically what common sense should tell us anyway. I mean, G.K. Chesterton is called the apostle of common sense. And he spent an awful lot of time defending the family because he could see the consequences of the family being attacked and it succumbing to the zeitgeist, to the spirit of the age. And in that he was a prophet, because 80 years on from Chesterton, we can certainly see the damage and the chaos that's ensued as a result of the breakdown of the family. And we need to remember that yes, women suffer from the breakdown of the family, men suffer, fathers and mothers suffer, but the biggest sufferers, the biggest victims are the innocent, weak children, both inside and outside the womb, whose lives are wrecked because of the selfishness of their parents. So love is about laying down your life for others. That understanding of love is sadly lost from our present culture. Without it, the biggest victims are the weakest, and they are the children.
Yeah, I remember reading that in your memoir and being very touched by it. We've seen an awful lot of that in our own families too. And I love that. Just as a counterpoint, I was just sort of throwing out the statistic, but yeah, I think the personal stories are the most powerful. I think that that's what really can move people. The conversation points are sort of what's expected, the numbers, whatever, but actually living it out, actually seeing that witness of family life that's working, I almost want to say for a change, is just so important. What are some experiences that you've had in terms of, since you've been able to compare the two, what really jumps out at you in terms of your own role as a father? What are you seeing?
What I see in my son back in England, the absence of a father in his own life, he is completely disoriented as to what he should be doing or where he should be going or where he's come from. He's lost and very, very unhappy in consequence. My daughter over there, thankfully, has a very good, strong relationship with me in spite of our, my not being around as I should have been when I was younger. But as regards our children now, I just rejoice in the fact that we have this close bond. We have a strange dynamic because our son, Leo, who's 17, has Down syndrome and autism, and our daughter Evangeline, although she's 11 and only half the size of her big brother, is actually the big sister, because she's the one that obviously looks after him and not the other way around. So we have a somewhat different dynamic. But what I would say, and I've written about this on a number of occasions, that having a child with Down syndrome in the family is a great blessing, because it teaches us so many of the important lessons about giving ourselves to others, also about how we are dependent on God, because whatever difference and distance there is between me and my son in terms of ability, it's minuscule compared with the distance between me and God. And my dependence on God is much, much greater than my son's dependence on me. So these priceless lessons are a consequence, if you like, of accepting and embracing disability in our families.
What a powerful witness to your children, too. I feel like embracing involves getting down on your knees and being humbled, like you said, depending on God. And what more powerful lesson than your big, strong daddy getting down on his knees before God and laying it down.
Yeah, and literally at the moment, because our son Leo, who's 17, is still not potty trained, so I'm getting down on my knees, changing his diaper still. So that it's not just the spiritual getting down on your knees, and of course, in that sense, we're all supposed to be living our lives on our knees. But there's the literal and physical that the old man that I am, I'm still managing by the grace of God to be healthy enough to change my son's diapers.
It makes me think of Christ getting down on his knees to wash the feet of the disciples, that incredible moment of lowering ourselves down to place ourselves at the service of another human being. Can there be anything more elevated?
Nothing more elevated and nothing more edifying, in the sense that it lifts up our own souls. I mean, that's the great paradox and mystery of the Christian life, is that in giving ourselves to others, we actually receive far more than we give. So, the more that we sacrifice ourselves, the more we actually receive, and the more joyful we become. And, again, the best way of, a paradox seems like a contradiction. The best way of proving the paradox is to try it. And, and certainly that's the experience that we have in our family with the challenges of being parents and these spouses, that the more we give ourselves to the other, the more we receive. And the Christian life is best proved in the practice.
It's just an unbelievable treasure hunt. I have often said to younger marriages in trouble, we just celebrated our 34th anniversary. Thanks be to God. And I was just saying to Charlie yesterday, I feel like we've grown up together, because that's really what that friction, that learning to adjust and adapt and serve really happens. It's our path of sanctification. And one of the things that I say to younger couples so often is, this is a treasure hunt. And until you really have a chance to go round that track a few times, you're not really getting down deep. You're not wearing the grooves down enough to really discover the richer treasures, which come through perseverance and sacrifice and forgiveness. It's not like in the movies, where love is this incendiary, momentary thing. And when the explosion fades, you move on to being in love with somebody else. That is not love.
Well, exactly. It's the antithesis of love, because it's selfish and love is selfless. And so that's one of the problems we've got in the world in which we live, is we are using the same words for entirely different things. So the modern understanding of love is it's about feeling. And feelings are irrational and they're transient and they pass. And when the feeling goes, you're no longer in love, right? But we know that as Christians, that love is actually rational. It's a rational choice. It's freely choosing to lay down our lives for the beloved. And the beloved may be our enemy. It's not, so it's nothing to do with what we feel, because obviously the feelings of love we have towards our friends is going to be different from the feelings we have towards our enemies. The feelings we have towards our parents are going to be different from the feelings we have towards our children or towards our spouse. The feelings, philosophically speaking, are accidental. What is of the essence is the free choice, the rational choice to lay down your life, to sacrifice yourself for the other. That is the rational essence of love as Christians understand it. Has nothing to do with feeling.
So right. And there's this sense, too, in our culture that if the other person isn't making you feel something, that they've let you down, as if fulfillment is supposed to come from your spouse.
Well, fulfillment basically is to come from selfishness, and the other person only exists to fulfill your selfish desires and your need to be instantly gratified in in everything you want. And if you can't find someone that's going to do that for you, you find someone else. And of course, the tragedy is that sort of selfish understanding leads to misery, because there's no one out there that's going to actually just be there for your self gratification. So it means you don't actually form lasting relationships, and you find yourself in middle-aged, loveless, and realizing that the pursuit of the short-sighted actually leads to misery.
Our fulfillment obviously is only going to be found in God, and we only find God in imitating his self-gifts. So that discovery of our authentic selves and the authentic other person is found in letting ourselves be lost in service and in love of God and all of that. It's really this incredible paradox. I love one of the reasons I love your books so much is you have a way with words, and you can tap at a paradox and open it up in a way that is so accessible. And that's one of them, that you have to die in order to live. It's very Christian.
And also something which is counterintuitive but absolutely true is that the perfect and true human person is the person of Jesus Christ. So the more we become like Christ, the more fully human we become. And in becoming more fully human, we actually become more fully happy, because we are meant as human persons, made in the image of God, to be happy. But in order to attain that happiness, we have to emulate the person who's the perfect human being, who's Jesus Christ. He lays down his life for us. He's fully happy. And we need to lay down our lives for him and for each other so that we can share in that happiness.
I love what Mother Teresa says about how a cheerful disposition is often a mask for a life of sacrifice and service. So true.
Yeah, I mean, there's a difference between transient pleasure and the so-called happiness that brings, and this deep-seated joy, which just has a serenity and what T.S. Eliot at the end of The Wasteland calls the peace that passeth all understanding.
We're looking at things that are so deep and so transcendent and so profound. I'd like to look at just some of the everyday sort of practical things. What are some ways that your own personal passions and your own development as a person impacts your family culture as a homeschooling dad? I'm thinking of how important music is to you, or at least that's what your memoir spoke to me, that music was really something that fed you along the way. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, by the grace of God, I've always had this attraction to the good, the true, and the beautiful. So those things which are good, true, and beautiful, and of course that manifests itself out in the arts. So clearly, I'm very passionate about literature. I'm also passionate about the visual arts and about architecture. And yes, I'm passionate about music. Now, I have those sort of should we say, nostalgic bubbles from my past that are not necessarily I want to spend too much time having my children imbibe. But basically, our daughter plays the piano, and I wrote something once for an article about virtue versus virtuosity. So we want her to actually enjoy playing the piano. We don't want her to hate it because she has to be the best. Because playing the piano, as Chesterton says, if a thing is worth doing, it's worth doing badly. All right. Playing the piano is a good thing, and it doesn't really matter if she's the best or if she's the 500 millionth, best. Doing it is good, and and to hear her playing it and practicing is a joy to me. And yes, we have classical music is certainly part of the backdrop to our family, especially when we're driving in the car. But also, I like traditional folk music, the English folk music, Scottish folk music, Irish folk music. And indeed Cajun music, Louisiana. So I would actually recommend, while we're talking about it, two wonderful Catholic folk groups, Scythian, who sort of play a blend of Eastern European folk music, because they're from ethnically from Ukraine, but also Irish music. And then a wonderful group called L'Angelus, who are a wonderful Catholic family from Louisiana. And I really have fallen in love with Cajun music and Cajun culture in consequence of listening to their CDs, and I've had the joy of seeing them live on more than one occasion. So, so we folk music and classical music. And of course, it goes without saying, our experience of the liturgy. We go to a mass that has a beautiful liturgy, and so polyphony and Gregorian chant is also part of the musical backdrop to our families' lives.
How wonderful to have a family culture that really is kind of continually or habitually tasting the banquet of the beauty that God provides, whether spoken through each other's talents or through nature or whatever that is. I know that you love poetry. I was privileged to hear you speak about Gerard Manley Hopkins once years ago on one of the Homeschool Connections free webinars. What a joy it is to just have a culture that appreciates those things, and you can share in them and be fed by them.
Yeah, basically happiness is connected to, I don't want to get too deep here, but the philosophers talk about the good, the true, and the beautiful, Plato and Aristotle, etc. But I think that Christ reveals himself as the good, the true, and the beautiful when he says in the gospel, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And I think that in Christ is the way of goodness, the way of love. He's the truth of reason, and he's the beauty of creation, the beauty of creativity. And we're meant to see the presence of Christ, in great works of literature, great works of art, beautiful music. But I look out my window now and I'm going to see a whole forest of trees and green leaves on the trees. You're also meant to see Christ in the presence of creation. God is, after all, the creator, and this is his work of art. God doesn't make things like a machine makes them. There's no mass production in nature. Every single individual tree out there is as unique as we are, because God loves things into being. And when we see things the way we're supposed to see them, we see the presence of God's love in his creatures.
Yeah, it's really amazing, isn't it? It gives you that sense of God's love to kind of delve into nature in that way. It's very freeing when you see what he displays for our pleasure every day.
So absolutely. So in raising children, we try to raise them in that triune splendor of, you raise them in goodness. In other words, you teach them virtue. You raise them in truth. You make it perfectly clear that reason is at the center of the Christian life. There's nothing we're called to believe which is irrational. Fides et ratio, faith and reason are an indissoluble marriage. But also you teach them to see and experience and love beauty, and not just to see and experience and love beauty, but to do it. In other words, to become creative themselves, so that their creative gifts given to them by God, their talents, can be manifest in the making of beautiful things.
That's so beautiful. I love that some of the liberal arts colleges, and I know that you were a guest artist in residence, I believe, at St. Thomas More in New Hampshire for a little while.
I was for 2 glorious years, one of my favorite places out there.
And a lot of our homeschoolers here on Long Island love them too. My daughter did a great books program there, and we have some graduates from there already too. Amazing place, and that they were part of the required system there of education is that they learn to make things by hand that are beautiful, that's part of their development. I also just wanted to mention that I've heard so many stories over the years where beauty touched someone's heart, whether walking into a Catholic church or a sunset or whatever it is, and it caused a conversion where somebody opened their heart to God. But you also encountered moments in your memoir where you talk about goodness, just the simple goodness of other people, and how that opened your heart then to beauty and truth, and how that all tied together for you. It's incredible.
Precisely. I mean, the point is that the most direct way we can convert others is to become saints. And I know that's easier said than done, but insofar as we succeed, in other words, insofar as we're on the path to sanctity and getting better at it by the grace of God and by our own obedience to those gifts, the more we're a beacon of light in an increasingly dark world. And we need to realize that the darker the world gets, the brighter the candles will shine. So we just need to work on our sanctity. And in some ways, it might seem more difficult in a dark culture. But in actual fact, you look at the history of the church, the greatest saints have been produced in the darkest times.
Yeah. Thank you. There's so many different areas that we could go into in a lot of depth. If there were just one area that you wanted to encourage homeschooling dads about the kind of influence that you can have with your kids, what would it be?
Well, I think the first of all is that we need to be there. So, I like many fathers, I have this tension. I travel a lot giving talks, but I am blessed that when I'm not traveling to give talks, I'm working from home. I'm actually speaking from my home office. My children, I can hear them downstairs as I speak. But there's this tension, of course. But the key thing is we need to put our families at the center of our lives. We should not be putting any secular job or any earning money ahead of our families. Our primary role is as pater familias, as father of the family. And the most important thing about that is to be present to our families, to actually spend time with them and to be happy spending time with them. Don't look upon this as something which is a bit irritating until I can actually get back to something that interests me more. No, we have to be present, spiritually, mentally, and physically with our children and with our wives. And so, that's what we're called to do, and to realize that above all else, under our need to get to heaven, we are pater familias, father of the family. And indeed, I would say it's not even under our call to get to heaven, because this is the path we've chosen. we've chosen the married life, and now that we've chosen fatherhood and being husbands, this is the means by which we get to heaven under grace. And if we're miserable failures as fathers and as husbands, we're going to be in a bad position when we face our Lord at the end of time. We need to get this right. And of course, we need to be prayerful about it, because we need supernatural help. Now, if we think we can do it for our own arrogant will, we're going to be in big trouble. So we need to be practicing our faith. We have to have a prayer life with our family, and not just by ourselves. And our family prayers, going to the liturgy as a family, and you're basically realizing that you can't do it without God's grace, and conveying that through one's own example, to one's members of one's family.
Thank you so much. That's so powerful and concise. And I really see again and again that when a father is at least trying, with God's help, to stand up and be manly in that sense of the noble sense of being a man and being the head of a family, it helps the rest of the family to fall into place. Others know their roles intuitively when the father knows his own and is not afraid to be a leader. And of course, we're not talking about domination or anything sinful. We're talking about leadership, and that's different. That's
leadership in the sense of self-sacrifice, showing that leadership means laying down your life for those you love. That is what leadership is. And men do that in a different way to the way women do it. We're both called to do it, of course. But women have their way of sacrificing themselves for their families. Men have their way. One is masculine, one's feminine. It's the way it's meant to be. But that masculine presence in the family is crucial.
It truly is. Thanks be to God for all our good dads and for those who have just been willing to learn as they go, to be humble, get to confession and kind of struggle on. Such a good example for our kids. All right, everybody, make sure that you check out Joseph's beautiful courses at Homeschool Connection. So many to choose from. I believe he's got about 15 at this point. Also look at the Imaginative Conservative. And your website is jpearce.com, is that correct?
jpearce.co.
.co. So it's letter J, then PEARCE.co. Check it out. And thank you so much again for being with us today.
My pleasure. God bless you, Lisa.
Thank you. God bless you too. And everybody stay tuned for our short feature coming right up.
Hi, I'm AJ Catapan. Welcome to Books and Blessings, a place where I get to share with you some of my favorite books for Catholic teens and tweens. Today, I'd like to introduce you to A Single Bead, a novel by Catholic author Stephanie Engelman. A Single Bead tells the story of a teenage girl named Caitlin, whose grandmother passed away in a plane crash. This sudden death causes Caitlin's mother to fall into a deep depression. On the one-year anniversary of the grandmother's passing, the family gathers for a memorial at the site of the crash. As the family begins to pray the rosary in the middle of a field, Caitlin decides she needs to step away. She wants nothing to do with praying a rosary at this time. When she enters an area of the field with trees, she finds a rosary bead nestled among some flowers. However, this is no ordinary rosary bead. This is a bead that belonged to her grandmother's rosary. The truly amazing thing is that her grandmother's rosary was personalized with the initials of every one of her children and grandchildren. As Caitlin examines the bead, she realizes that she has found her bead, the one with her initials on it. Then she goes on to discover that other people have found beads from her grandmother's rosary, and that each of them believes there has been some kind of mystical or miraculous event tied to the bead. Caitlin sets off on a quest to find her mother's bead, hoping it will help lift her mother out of her depression. This story is a journey of faith, family, and the power of prayer. Young teens who struggle with believing in prayer and maybe even believing in God's ability to work in their lives will enjoy this book. Caitlin comes across as a pretty typical teen who has some faith but hasn't quite gotten to the point of really making it a part of her everyday existence yet. Author Stephanie Engelman does a nice job of balancing out faith-filled characters with those who struggle with their faith. This book would be an excellent novel to read during October, the month of the Rosary, or during May as we celebrate Our Lady. A Single Bead by Stephanie Engelman has won a Catholic Press Association Book Award and is recommended for ages 12 and up. To see more book suggestions, visit my website at ajcatapan.com. There you can also learn more about my own books for young readers. For your mystery fan, check out 7 Riddles to Nowhere. For your older teen, check out my YA novel Angelhood, which has been called a teen version of It's a Wonderful Life. Thanks for joining me on Books and Blessings. Be sure to find me online on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, or on my website, ajcatapan.com. Until next time, happy reading.
And that's our show for today. Our program is sponsored by homeschoolconnections.com. Be sure to subscribe to Homeschooling Saints and leave us an honest review. God bless you, and thank you for joining us.